Hello, my name is Emily Cantonwine, and I will be presenting a field study that looked at the mixture of elemental sulfur with synthetic fungicides for the management of late leaf spot. Late leaf spot is caused by the fungus Nothopassalora personata, which is shown near the bottom of the screen. These leaf spots tend to have sort of a chocolate brown coloration, and most of the secondary sporulation that occurs is going to be on the underside of the leaf spot, and it tends to produce a lot of secondary spores. Early leaf spot is a very similar disease. It's shown at the top of the screen, and one of the differences is secondary sporulation of the early leaf spot fungus occurs at on the upper surface of the lesion. Both of these pathogens cause disease that leads to premature defoliation, which, if it's severe enough, can lead to yield loss. And for this reason, these fungi are managed each year in fields where they tend to occur, specifically in the southeastern United States. And the management strategies for leaf spot include a number of tools. There's crop rotation, which helps to reduce the initial inoculum that is available in a field which starts an epidemic. Also, some peanut genotypes have more resistance to infection or result in fewer secondary spores that are produced by the fungi, which can lead to reduction in epidemics. And then in fields where crop rotation and host resistance is not enough, fungicides are employed. And typically it's a mixture of synthetic fungicides such as your DMIs, your QoIs, and your SDHIs, and then a protectant fungicide, chlorothalonil. And chlorothalonil is heavily used in leaf spot management. It's a protectant fungicide, but it has a very broad spectrum of activity, so there's very low risk for these fungi to develop resistance when chlorothalonil is employed. There is another protectant fungicide that has a history of use in peanut, and this is elemental sulfur. In fact, this fungicide was the predominant fungicide used prior to 1971 when chlorothalonil was introduced. And nowadays, sulfur isn't used a lot, but when it is used in a peanut field, it's typically used as a nutritional supplement. It helps to green up the plants. It also does have a possible role in organic production systems, and it has been evaluated for that purpose. And more recently, however, it's been evaluated as an alternative to chlorothalonil for resistance management. This is just the results of a study that Albert Colbreth published this past year, looking at the effects of mixing sulfur with DMI fungicides. And this is the area under the disease progress curve, so it's representative of sort of the overall leaf spot epidemic. And what he found was that there was a significant reduction when sulfur was applied, either alone in this case or with 2 DMI fungicides, ciproconazole, and then a mixture of prothioconazole and tebuconazole. And these fungicides had lost some activity against the late leaf spot pathogen. So by adding sulfur to these DMI fungicides, there was a significant improvement that was better than just sulfur alone or the DMI fungicides alone. So we wanted to follow up on this research, and we asked 3 questions related to this research that I'll be presenting today. Number one, we wanted to know whether mixing sulfur with QoI fungicides would provide a similar effect as to what we saw with the DMI fungicides. We were also interested in whether this effect would occur for fungicides that had adequate efficacies against the late leaf spot pathogen. And then we wanted to know how sulfur mixtures compared to low-rate Bravo mixtures, as well as to a full-strength Bravo program. 2 field experiments were conducted, one in Plains and one in Tifton, Georgia, and there were 4 replications per fungicide treatments. I'll go over the list of fungicide treatments in the next slide, but with this slide I'd just like to point out that the late leaf spot disease was monitored at the end of the season, and we used the Florida 1 to 10 scale rating system. If you're not familiar with that, this system takes number of leaf spots as well as percent defoliation due to leaf spot into account. The treatments included a non-systemic fungicide control, and then 4 different systemic fungicide. We had Provocil, which was our DMI with good efficacy fungicide. We had Tebuconazole, which was our DMI with poor efficacy against this late leaf spot pathogen. We had Headline, which we used as our QoI with good efficacy against the late leaf spot pathogen, and then Abound as the QoI with poor efficacy against late leaf spot pathogen. And then these treatments were also conducted with sulfur. So we had these treatments with and without sulfur. And the sulfur we used was microthiol disperse, and we used the label rate in Tifton. And then in Plains, we used label rate, microthiol disperse. We also evaluated another type of sulfur called Kala, again using label rate. And then we compared, we also had a treatment where we had these synthetic fungicides with a low rate of Bravo, and then we had a full rate of Bravo as a comparison. All of these fungicide treatments were applied using a calendar-based program, and there were 7 applications across the season. Now this type of program is not something a grower would use, but it's really useful for research purposes to compare how these different treatments compare to each other. In Tifton, looking at the final Florida 1 to 10 scale rating system, you will see that all of the treatments, when sulfur was added, there was a significant reduction to leaf spot, final leaf spot rating. There was no difference between the DMI minus and the QoI minus fungicides when there was no sulfur compared to our untreated control. And interestingly, the addition of sulfur resulted in very similar leaf spot ratings, whether the synthetic fungicide had high efficacy or lower efficacy. So that was quite an interesting response. And the addition of sulfur with the synthetic fungicide, even with our low efficacy fungicides, our DMI minus and our QoI minus, resulted in more suppression when sulfur was added than the non-treated control did when sulfur was added. In Plains, we saw a very similar response. There was one difference, and that is our QoI plus had very high efficacy just by itself, and so we didn't quite see the response with this particular synthetic fungicide. But for all of the other ones, we did. And there are a lot of treatments here, so the way I'm going to show you this is I'm going to give you a line. Everything below this line is statistically similar to each other. And so, for example, all of the Bravo mixtures were statistically similar to, and I should say low rate Bravo mixtures were statistically similar to our our full-strength Bravo 7 spray program. The same was true for all of the sulfur treatments when they were mixed with a synthetic fungicide. The line, everything, all of the columns that go above this upper line were statistically similar to the non-treated control. So there was one sulfur treatment, our sulfur, that did not perform as well as our microthiol disperse. But I'd like to point out that we were following label rate, and it turned out that the sulfur label had a lower active ingredient rate of sulfur than the microthiol disperse. To conclude, the effect of sulfur does appear to occur with both DMI and QoI fungicides, and the effect is noticeable regardless of efficacy, at least for some locations. Sulfur mixtures provided similar disease management as the low-rate chlorothalonil mixtures did, and in the Plains experiment, the effect was similar to a full-strength chlorothalonil 7 spray program. Further research is underway. We are currently looking at comparing different sulfur products, and this time we'll make sure that the active ingredient rates are identical. So we're looking at Kala as well as our microthiol disperse as well as some other sulfur products. We're also very interested in trying to understand how these sulfur mixtures are providing the suppression we're seeing, especially for our synthetic fungicides, where alone they are performing similarly to our no fungicide controls. So why is it when we add sulfur are we seeing such a benefit when with these fungicides? And so we'll be looking at whether these sulfur mixtures are resulting in reduced number of infections, or perhaps the effect is just a slowdown of defoliation. Sulfur has been shown to green up plants, make them a little bit healthier, so maybe there's something there. And it's also possible that there's a combination going on. And with that, I would like to thank you all for your participation in my first virtual presentation. And I'd like to thank my co-authors. And then I'd also like to give a shout out to Damien Castellano, who was a graduate student working on a completely different project, who put in a lot of field work on this one. So thank you, Damien. With that, I will say goodbye.